Let's change gears a little bit, and we're going to start talking about some of our application configuration items. If we head once again into Manage Setup, and this time just below Account Maintenance, we're going to Application Configuration. We're going to take the top option there, Initial Setup. This page has so much wonderful information. Toward the top, there are a number of configuration options. We're not taking a look at those right now, though we will double back and look at a handful of them. What I really want to focus on is the information that's further down the page, as this is an absolute gold mine. If we scroll down and take a look at that, we have our Contract Insight activation and Contract Insight license information. So we can see everything that has been licensed in this system. We can also see our number of user licenses, the kinds of user licenses we have, and how many people are logged in using those kinds of licenses. So in this example, we have one traditional license for concurrent users active right now at a maximum of 10. And we can see the variety of modules that are available in this instance of CobbleStone. Now, the specifics are, of course, going to differ from client to client, from system to system, including the additional options. It's all dependent on what has been licensed. But this is a great place to look at what we've got in the system. Just above that, as I mentioned, we do have some configuration options. Now, bear in mind, with these configuration options, for the vast majority, the configuration options are system-wide. They will impact all users. Changing an application configuration config setting or one that's in our initial setup config setting is really quite easy. When we're ready to head in and modify one of our configuration settings, again, in initial setup or config settings, if we're on the initial setup page, we'll scroll down and find the appropriate item and click modify. If we are in config settings, however, we need to select our configuration group. So we're presented with a drop down. We see kind of peeking out back here, and we'll select the table or other configuration group. Most systems defaults to the contracts configuration group. They are in alphabetical order and will work their way down from there. But either way, each group is broken into subgroups, like the one we see here, the subgroup for attachments. And this is in my contracts group. So I found it, I've clicked modify, I got my pop-up. It says, do you want to modify this application settings? Yes, I am sure that I want to modify it, so I click OK. At that point, I'm taken back up to the top of the screen, and I am allowed to alter this setting. So in this case, it's allow altering of contract types, and it's presently set to true. I really like to set this to false in my system, so I'd open up the pick list, select false, and click Update Setup Value. And the same process holds true as we go through the other groups in the system. And we have a number of different groups, all with their own subgroups, some that you'll see time and again, some that are unique just to those groups. Now, the items that we see on the screen presently are just true and false options, but those are not the only types of settings we have. We can see integer, we can see text, we can see file extension and file type, we can see rich text, we can even see some that are marked as handled by the system. Those we cannot alter. But the rest we can tweak as we go throughout. And we'll take a look at some of these settings when we jump into your system. Any questions so far about the configuration setting and modification thereof? But first, I want to scroll down the page a little bit and take a look at the next box down. So if we keep going, we want to take a look at the items that have been licensed inside the system. So it should be after your task management. Maybe one more. So let's keep scrolling down. There we go. Perfect. So here we can see our activation and account number when the system is set to expire. And then right below that, we see how many licenses are being used at any given time. So we know that there's one admin user out of a maximum of 20 in the system right now. No super, standard, or read-only users. We can see all of the licensed options as well. So again, just remember that different clients, their lists are going to vary quite significantly. You've got a list of just about everything here. So we can see all the various modules. So very useful for being able to take a look and get an overview of the application. If we scroll back toward the top of this page, though, I do want to go over some of the configuration settings that live on the initial setup page. If we could scroll on up, I don't know if my video is slowed. There we go. We're going to go almost all the way to the top. There we go. Now I've caught up with it. All right, so the first two I always like to make a point of are application activation key and application license key. Absolutely never change either of those values unless on the line with a CobbleStone support team member and you have the new value in hand from CobbleStone. If you alter either of those without having a valid entry from CobbleStone, you may potentially lose access to the system and even the data that's contained within. So be incredibly careful with those two. But here in the initial setup group, we can see some of those topics that I was talking about, like being able to deactivate the chat and messaging. We've got a handful of other system-wide sorts of options as well. Yeah, so right now the chat icon is turned off in your system. If you wanted to turn that on, we could click modify and flip that over to true. Yep, so we'll click OK. Takes us back to the top, and then you could flip that value from false to true and click update setup value. And that's all it takes to change a configuration item. Now, keep in mind that these are restricted solely to system administrators, so you don't have to worry about people just jumping in and changing things on you. Session timeout in minutes is always one that I like to talk about as well. This determines how quickly will auto time out. So if a user has been sitting on one page for X amount of time, he or she can be automatically logged out. So it defaults to 60 minutes. Right now it's set to 90. I like 90. It all depends on company policy, since there is personal information within here. And all sorts of other very important information. It's not personal in nature. Your company policies may dictate what that timeout must be. If we move down a few, we can see the news alerts. So we are working with the news alerts. We've got that filled, but that could always be turned off by removing the URL completely. Not something that I recommend, but it is doable. So show workspaces. This is really useful for an organization who is not using additional workspaces. If they're only using core application, then it hides the drop-down value, the drop-down list from us, so we get a little bit of that real estate back. So you can see a handful of other useful and system-wide sorts of settings. Some about the system itself, some about tasks. But I'd like to move into the config settings area, if that's okay. And there's two ways we can get there. We could go back through our manage setup menu, But also from here on our side menu, the second option down goes to application configuration. So we are presented with our first group. Again, it's defaulted to contracts. We can change our groups if we need to. There are a couple of settings I want to take a look at while we're on contracts, though. And if we scroll down a little bit, what I'm looking for is our type restriction and type changing. Yeah, so some API type information, some calculations based primarily around budget and spend. Here we can say if we're defaulting the department on contracts or requests. We do have the option for a quick company add, which is switched on for you right now. And there's the one I was looking for, allow altering of contract types. If we mark this to false, once we've made it to the details screen, the contract type field is locked. That's an incredibly important function because we have fields by type and we don't want to start adding or removing fields if we have important data in there. So I typically set this to false. Some organizations do still keep it to true based on their very specific needs, but as a rule, I set this to false. Again, so we can't change the contract type once we've committed the record to the system. And I do want to take a quick look at a couple other configuration settings, but I want to change groups for this one. So if we head up to select configuration group,
configuration.
Yep, toward the top center of your screen. Select configuration group. It's the pick list. Down just a little bit. It's just below your top navigation menu. Now you're scrolling all the way down the page. Having these nested items can make things a little difficult sometimes. If you just grab the outermost scroll bar and scroll up with that, it'll be probably a bit faster. The outer one. Now you're on the inner scroll bar. We're moving through that table. Now we've got the whole page. And now just right about there. Yep, perfect. So let's open that on up. And I want to go to our scheduled jobs contracts tab, group next.
Yeah,
Yes, that's the one we're in, scheduled jobs contracts. And just want to scroll down to the timers subgroup. There we go. So here we are in the timers subgroup. This is one of the places that we can change the frequency of the timer that we can look at in the scheduler manager. So this is specifically for our contract tasks emails and our contract emails, but other areas have very similar subgroups in them for timers. Just wanted you to be familiar with this particular area. There's one more place I want to look at before we stop looking at our configuration settings. It's one I always like to talk about as well. So let's head all the way back up to the top of the page, and we're going to change our configuration group one more time. And this time we want to go to the security group. Perfect. So the first option under the subgroup content, the client-defined header content, that lets us put in text or even an image in the upper left-hand corner of the application. And that is a rich text field, so you could put in HTML as well with that. So that's used incredibly frequently for helping brand to an organization's logo. Now I want to scroll down the page a bit. Yeah, so just to the left of that quick search, that's where that logo would appear. I want to scroll down to our password subgroup. Right here. Perfect. This is a very common stop for new organizations as well. Now, I always want to make sure that a client touches base with their IT security team to double check on password security regulations or procedures